Now, this week is Dyslexia Awareness Week. So we wanted to talk about it because it's talked about a lot, but it's misunderstood. People talk about it and quite frankly, some of the things they say about it is wrong. Dyslexia can cause difficulties with things like reading and writing, and it's thought to affect around 1 in 10 people. It's also not always spotted. According to the British Dyslexia Association, over 6 million individuals in the UK have dyslexia and may not have received a diagnosis. They say if a child hasn't been diagnosed before the age of 8 and doesn't receive the support they need, it can have a lifelong impact. Let's get some local support and advice now when it comes to dyslexia. Rachel Home is the founder and CEO of Spectrum Dynamics, CIC, based in Lancaster. Rachel, good morning.
Good morning.
So just explain what you do.
So we're quite a new not-for-profit, and we've got this vision that we want to eliminate obstacles really to education and employment, and we actually cover it for all neurodivergent youth. So that's not just dyslexia, that's ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, PDA, which is a pathological demand avoidance, and that's because often there's a co-occurrence anyway with these with dyslexic. I think there's 15 to 20% people worldwide are neurodivergent, and then anything between say 25 and 40% when you look at the studies with let's say ADHD of dyslexia problem and vice versa. So there's a massively overlap as well with them.
Yeah, and as we've heard quite a few times this morning, dyslexia isn't always spotted when children are at school.
No, that's right, and it's the same for them all really. There's a stigma, there's a bias attached to it. People tend to think that they look at it in a deficit model really, and it's not a disadvantage at all. If dealt with properly, it's got all sorts of advantages, whether that's resulting in being able to spot patterns, your critical thinking that's improved, increased creativity, communication skills. So part of what we want to do is to offer those early intervention services for families and schools, and give them that knowledge that it kind of comes from a strengths-based approach rather than that deficit approach. Like you just said, we know that the early identification is key, not in terms of education, but when you think of obviously that there's a big increase in mental health, so it follows that. If your child feels different but doesn't know why, or they're hearing negative language surrounding a diagnosis, especially females often mask these symptoms because they want to fit in, so they don't, it doesn't always become apparent.
Rachel, thank you for joining us this morning. Rachel Home, founder and CEO of Spectrum Dynamics. It's a CIC based in Lancaster. As we heard there from Rachel, there is some people live with dyslexia through school. It's not always spotted. Our next guest knows what a difference a diagnosis can make in many areas of her life. Joanne Levy was diagnosed in 2011 at the age of 35 while studying towards a graduate diploma in law at UCLan. Joanne, good morning.
Good morning.
What was it like when you got that diagnosis?
It was massive. It was such a relief. It was kind of interesting how I found out because it had never been suggested to me that I might be dyslexic or have any kind of learning difficulties of any sort. I came from a very high achieving family, but I'd always been kind of a bit of a black sheep, never did really very well at school. Teachers were always frustrated with me. They just thought I was a bit lazy, a bit naughty, a bit of a nuisance. And then when I had my own children, my younger daughter started sort of she was sort of displaying things like she was always really bad at spelling, which is a real sort of stereotypical thing that people think of when they look at dyslexia. They think, it's people who can't spell. And I started researching into dyslexia, and the more I looked into it, the more I thought, hang on a minute, that's me. I'm like that. I can't read maps. I'm absolutely hopeless at reading maps. People tell me I should be able to. Well, you're really clever. Why can't you read a map? Well, I can't. So that's that, you know. So fortunately, I was at university at the time studying for my graduate diploma. So I'd already done my first degree at Lancaster University when I was in my early 20s. And because I was at university, I was able to access the educational psychology support through the disability services, and they subsidised an assessment which showed that I was dyslexic, in fact, quite severely dyslexic. And the reason that it wasn't ever spotted was because at school I was clever enough to be able to hide the fact that I was dyslexic. And so it just wasn't seen, which led to me becoming very kind of disenfranchised, because people were telling me I was lazy when I knew that I wasn't lazy. I just knew I couldn't get my thoughts down onto paper. So it sort of delayed my ability to achieve. And I think if I'd had a diagnosis earlier and had the sort of exam support, you know, because it really was a lot to do with exams, writing essays, that sort of thing. You know, teachers used to say to me, well, you can talk a lot in class, why can't you write it down? Yeah. And it was because I was dyslexic, but nobody realised.
And having that diagnosis now, for you, you kind of go, it all makes sense now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also gives access to things as well, access to support even in the workplace. So after I'd finished my graduate diploma, I went on to work for a law firm, and I was able to get support through assistive technology. So there's a number of packages that you can get that are kind of a speech-to-text things, so that if I was writing a complicated letter or a complicated document for a court, I could actually talk to the computer and it would type it for me, and then I could go back and kind of, you know, fix the bits that hadn't kind of come out quite right. But it probably sped up my ability to work by, you know, it kind of doubled, tripled the speed at which I was able to work, because it's so much easier for me to get my words out verbally than it is for me to write them down or type them.
Joanne, thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. Joanne Levy there. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It just, because a lot of children and young people didn't have that diagnosis at school, and they get it in much later life.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, it all makes sense now. All makes sense. Perhaps your children or grandchildren are going through something similar. What support is out there for children at school? I'd love to hear from you.